Welcome to Association Chat, an online discussion where we warm ourselves by the virtual fire with the topics of the day, welcoming thought leaders and trailblazers alike to join up in this online home for the community. I'm the host of Association Chat, Kiki L'Italienne, and welcome to this very special episode. Today we have a truly fascinating guest, a friend, and just an amazing overall human being, author, speaker, and strategist, David Allison. David's shaken up the world of marketing with his groundbreaking book, The Death of Demographics, Valuegraphic Marketing for a Values-Driven World. And let me tell you, I have had the good fortune of talking with David over a couple of years, at the beginning of 2020, I guess, right before the world sort of got shaken up. And I have to tell you that his first book was amazing. This book is amazing. The work that he's doing will transform the way that you think about marketing and connecting to your members. David's extensive experience in marketing and research has led him to challenge the traditional reliance on demographics and instead focus on the values that drive human behavior. And in our conversation today, we're going to dive deep into the concept of value graphics. We're going to explore the 56 core values that shape our lives. We're going to discuss the 15 value graphics archetypes and explore how associations and individuals can leverage this information for better communication and success. So I want you to get ready for an insightful and thought-provoking conversation with the one, the only, David Allison. Yes, David.
That's an intro. I feel like you're Johnny Carson, and I'm just, I don't know. I'm sitting down in the chair. Here we go.
I actually, I put this on. So I am recording this and beaming it live to YouTube, but I actually took it off of the other social media channels because I wanted the chance for us to have our conversation and then also give a little bit of additional information afterwards, edit it a little bit and get it out on these other channels. Because in the past, you and we have had some amazing conversations and you have some amazing stories. And so I thought, I'm not sure what I'm going to hear from David today. And so I thought, let's invite some people to this conversation. But I really want to talk about, I want to dig into value graphics, obviously, what it is and why you created it. But I also want to get into what you've learned over these years as you've gone from one book to the second book, the projects and programs that you've been working on, and to see where things are headed. So let's just start with the basics. Where did it come from? Where did why wasn't it enough? Why weren't you happy with demographics and psychographics, David Allison?
Well, that's an interesting story in and of itself. I was in marketing for a very, very long time, and it all starts the same way everything in the business world starts, which is trying to understand how are we going to get some people to do something that we want them to do. And associations, same thing there. There's people you want to get to be members. There's people you want to get to come to the lunch. There's people you want to influence with advocacy work you're doing on behalf of whatever industry you're working in. There's all kinds of groups of people you're trying to understand. And the first job always is to sit down and say, okay, who are these people? Mm-hmm. How can we understand them? Let's do a little sketch here. Let's figure it out. And we go, well, they're, men who are this age and have this much money and they're married and and then we say, okay, cool. Now we know who they are. And maybe a little bit of psychographic information about how they've behaved in the past or how they feel about something. And then we go and spend money and time and resources, capacity to try and get those folks to do something. So in my case, in the marketing company I had, it was all about real estate development. So it was big, large condo towers and resort communities and office buildings. And so the cool thing about that was we would spend $1 million targeting this group of people that we defined demographically and psychographically. And then about 3 years later, I got to stand in a room and see them. And there's a ribbon cutting, and so there's a shrimp on a stick and a glass of cheap champagne, probably prosecco that we were pretending was champagne.
Yeah.
And you look around and you go, who the heck are all these people?
Yeah.
10 or 15% of them were the people that I targeted, and the rest of them, how'd you get here? What are you doing here? I didn't create messages for you. I didn't buy stuff, ads in your channels. Thank you for coming. You made me look like a rock star. We sold out the building, but what are you doing here? How did this happen?
Yeah.
So that's the problem I set out to solve. When I sold my company, I said, let's see what's really going on. And that takes you into human behavior. And now you have to start looking at psychology and psychiatry and neurology and sociology and figuring out, it's a very long-winded answer to your very first question, but really, the reason everyone was in that room is for the same reason that anybody does anything. We all wake up every morning as humans, and all we do all day is try and find things that are aligned with our values. That's how humans walk through the daily rituals of life. There's a piece of our brain that is solely devoted to analyzing everything around us and saying, how does this line up with our values? Okay, we're going to go that way, or we're going to go that way. We're going to make this decision. We're going to feel joy. We're going to feel anger. We're going to buy this soup. We're going to buy that soup. We're going to come to the association luncheon. We're not going to go to the association luncheon. It's always, always about our values. We are values driven. That's what it means to be human. So that's where it began.
And I think you don't have to convince me, because I have long ago realized that as soon as I had our first discussion, as soon as we sat down, and I think maybe we were 10 or 15 minutes into talking, I thought, this is it. This is the thing that I think that people have been getting wrong for so long, is not actually exploring this more. Why did we take it wholesale, that in looking at demographics and psychographics that was enough, that we got it right, that we had the answer?
Well, there was a time, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, when you would have been more right to do that. In history, demographics used to be our destiny. It was the way humans survived. If you were a young woman of 13 or 14 years old in a village in medieval France, and you hadn't gotten married and started to make babies, there was a problem. Like, your village was not going to. And if you were a 15-year-old guy and you didn't know how to work the spear and kill the woolly mammoth and bring home the woolly mammoth bacon for dinner, then the village down the street would figure out that you guys weren't doing things right, and they come take over. So we had a demographic destiny. But today we don't. Along comes this thing called technology, and suddenly we're all allowed to kind of more or less decide how we want to live our lives. There's still work to be done. There's still, all kinds of demographic nonsense going on out there, but more or less we can live however we want. And yet we're still using this archaic system from millennia ago to look at people and go, well, they're young, so therefore they're like this, or they're women, therefore they're like this. It's, in an era where we've disrupted home ownership, car ownership, space travel, pizza delivery, everything has been disrupted. We've yet to disrupt this fundamental piece of the way we approach everything we do, which is demographic profiling. It's time to disrupt demographics. We've got to do this.
Yeah. Well, and you use the word profiling, and I think that's a pretty good choice of words, because, there are dangers in thinking through a demographic lens. And I know that you talk about that, while it can be helpful for all kinds of different reasons to get that data, that can lead us down a path to things like ageism, which as a society, we're looking at, and we're saying we need to get away from these types of labels, because they're more harmful than they are good.
Yeah, there's two really, really great reasons why we need to give our heads a shake around this whole dominance of demographics. Demographics still have a role to play, you know?
Yeah.
I always use reading glasses because they're always here. They're not selling to 16-year-olds. There's a
Yeah.
demographic reality around who's going to buy these. And let's say they're made out of platinum and they cost $1,000. They didn't, but let's say they did. There's a demographic reality around who's going to buy reading glasses that cost $1,000 made out of platinum.
Mm-hmm.
But just because you know the demographics of a group of people doesn't mean you know who they are. All you know is what they are. And why they're going to buy something could be as varied from who knows. It could be environmentalism that's making me buy $1,000 reading glasses because I do not want to lose them. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to contribute to landfill. I don't want to have cheap ones that I keep throwing out because I break them all the time. I want a pair that I'm going to be very careful with. That could be the primary reason. And it's not about status, which is what you would assume for $1,000 pair of platinum reading glasses. Anyway, I'm off track. There's two really good reasons why. Welcome to Planet David. There's two really good reasons why that we need to stop using demographics. And the first one is they just do not work. And here's some stats. So we've done 750,000 surveys around the world now. We've talked to 750,000 people about what drives all their decisions. And we collected this data in a way that's referred to as a random stratified statistically representative sample, which is a lot of fun to say after one martini, but not after two martinis. A random
after two, you choose something else entirely.
You talk about, something else. Yeah, you tell bad jokes or something. Random stratified statistically representative sample. So what it means is it's an incredibly accurate representation in miniature of the real world. It's like our own little Lego model of the real world. So we can slice and dice it demographically. And we've done that and said, okay, let's see. How similar are people inside any one of these demographic cohorts or buckets, as I like to call them? So one bucket is boomers, another is millennials, another one's Gen Z. Then there's the women and men and people who make $100,000 a year, all those demographic buckets that we're familiar with. The people inside them, if we're going to think that we can target them, need to be similar. Otherwise, they're not going to be targetable. If there's no similarity there in terms of how they're going to react to something, then there's no point targeting this way. So the people within any one of those buckets, they only, on average, around the world, data more accurate than you need for a PhD from Harvard, they're about 10.5% similar. So there's a baked in, let's round off here. There's a 90% fail baked in to anything you do using demographics to try and understand people. It's why we get so excited about a 3.5% open rate on a marketing direct mail campaign. Like, whoa, we got 3. That's a 87% fail. And we're all excited because the best you could hope for is 10, right? That's about the best you can hope for. Now, here's the other stat. So inside demographic buckets, people agree with each other about 10% of the time. The entire planet, the population of planet Earth, just because we're breathing and alive, we all agree with each other about 8% of the time. So it's about 2.5% better to use demographics than to use nothing. It's like, okay, so that's the first reason why we shouldn't be using demographics. They just don't work. Second reason,
good reason,
you've already alluded to. The longer we continue to sit around and say demographics are the way to understand people, the longer we keep using these labels like male, female, rich, poor, young, old, gay, straight, black, white, all these other labels, the longer we're walking down this path of resorting to stereotypes. Because what are you going to do? Say, okay, my audience is 75% female. Therefore, let's make things pink because women like pink, right? So that's it's like the next logical step. Boomers, they're all bad with technology. And Gen Z, they're all like this, and they're all like those stereotypes are what fuel ageism, sexism, racism, homophobia, all these social problems we're trying to tackle and not doing a really great job with, frankly. And a lot of it is because we continue to say, oh yeah, but we got to keep looking at people based on these outward facing characteristics, because that's what we got to do. We got to understand if they're male or female, rich or poor, young or old, black or white, gay or straight. That's what's important, but it's not. It doesn't work. So let's break that and start looking at people based on what's on the inside. what really
Yeah.
matters, what makes us human, the things we have in common that bring us together. Demographics push us apart. Values bring us together.
So speaking of which, so what are those values? And I was interested to see we're at 56 core values now with the death of demographics. We are at 56 core values. Can we talk a little bit about that like? And I've heard you explain this before, but like I think it's a really interesting story. How did you arrive at the 56
Yeah.
values? How do you know that those are the ones? So go
So
ahead.
the
How do we get to
yeah,
these?
well, it's all about Halloween candy. Uh, we Kid comes home from Halloween and got a pillowcase full of candy. At least back in the old days when I was a kid. I don't know if it happens so much anymore. Everybody's worried about stranger danger, and my neighbors are
Yeah.
putting pins in the apples and whatever. So we don't do it as much. But I used to come home with a giant pillowcase, and for me, maybe it was sort of a little bit of a precursor to what I've ended up doing for a living. But the first thing you do is you dump it out on the dining room table and you start to sort it. And you stand
Hmm.
back and you go, wow, okay. There's the full size chocolate bars. Those are nice people. I wish I could. Was that Mrs. Smith down the road? You try and remember who gave you those because those are the good ones. Then there's the
Right.
lollipops and there's the bubble gum and then there's the miniature chocolate bars, which are almost as good as the. And so you put them in piles. And in each of those piles, there's a whole bunch of variation. So we brought home data from 750,000 long form interviews in 152 languages around the world. And we dumped the data on the dining room table and we stood back and went, how does this sort out? It goes in piles. There's a pile of things that people are saying to us over there that are about family. And there's another pile over there that's about belonging, and another pile that's about personal growth. And there's the ambition pile, and the social standing pile, and the health and well being pile. There's 56 piles. Now, what's important is we always talk about there being 56 core values, and it's true. But each of those values shows up in our lives in different ways. What family means to you and what family means to me can be very different, but we're both talking about family. So we coded all of those variations of those 56 values. And overall, there's more than 8,000 codes for how those 56 values show up in people's lives. So the easiest way to think about this is there's 56 things that drive what everybody does all over the world. And then there's just some slight variations on what those things mean to different people. But yeah, it's a really great number, frankly, because
Yeah.
it's it's understandable, right?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
like we were talking about like GNA or DNA gene sequencing. There's like 3 million different little bits on that spirally thing that we're all supposed to understand. It's only 56. We're not all that different from each other at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I love what you ended up doing with having the 15 value graphics archetypes too. So it's like this interesting combination that ends up the patterns that end up arriving, how they show up for these individuals. So talk to me about some of the archetypes and maybe your favorite archetype
Mhm.
of those 15.
Wow. Okay. So to say that the entire population of planet Earth fits into 15 categories or 15 archetypes is rather courageous.
Mhm.
That's a big, big, blunt instrument that we're using. But for the purposes of the book, it's a nice, understandable number. The fact is, humans are far more complex than that. And, we keep finding new subsegments and subsegments that cross with this other subsegment, this giant database. When we do custom work, it gets down, there's so far, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of specific profiles that come out of the database, and we keep finding new ones. But they all do kind of channel up into these 15 big Uber categories. And it is kind of lovely, again, to think that we're not that different from each other. That in a very rough pencil sketch on the back of a napkin kind of way, there's only 15 kinds of people in the world. So in the book, there's a little survey, a little survey you can send out, 15 questions. And depending on how people answer that, you can figure out which chapter, which archetype is most important, is most like the people you're trying to understand. So it gives you a rough and ready way to start using value graphics in addition to the demographics and psychographics that you're undoubtedly already using. So my favorite one, there's a group in there called the creatives. And these are people who come from all walks of life. Creatives can be people who are accountants or engineers or people who work in a factory, but they're people who see themselves as being creative and are attracted to people who are doing creative things and are attracted to different and interesting creative ways of looking at the world. And because that one variable is there, all the other things about that group of people, all the other values, all their wants and needs and expectations, they tend to line up in a very, very distinct way. The people who are in that category are so similar to each other that you could talk to them about anything in a way that's going to get the majority of them to go, that's for me, which is a really big advance. Because if you think about what we're doing now, back to those stats I shared earlier, we're looking at a group of people that we're defining demographically that at best only agree with each other 10% of the time. We see value graphic archetypes as men that agree on everything as much as 89% of the time. So you spend $1 talking demographically, you get a 10-cent dollar. You spend $1 speaking value graphically, you get an 89-cent dollar. I want the 89-cent dollar out there doing my work for me instead of the 10-cent dollar. So yeah, the archetypes are a great entry point. It's a great way to start seeing this. And for the price of a book, it's basically free. You can start to see how this makes sense. I've yet to meet somebody who, first thing everybody does when they buy the book is they take the quiz themselves. It's not meant for that, people. It's not a psychological test. It's a sociological test. You're supposed to do it with large groups of people, but everybody, including me, has done it. And the first thing that happens is people go, oh my God, this guy's reading my diary. How does he know me like this?
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's the proof. And then you go and do that with your customers or your prospects or your members. You do the same thing and you send it out and you come back and they say, wow, they're like this group. And that same level of connection you had, you now know your people to that same degree. You're like, okay, this is what moves the needle. This is what gets these folks to do stuff. It's a revelatory thing. Once you see this, you can't unsee it and you become a convert.
I have to admit, do you think that we're vain in wanting to take the tests and find out how to apply this stuff to ourselves? I mean, I did the same thing. It
Of
was the first
course,
thing I did.
everybody
Yeah.
does. Everybody does. It's
Yeah.
like it's why, the best-selling issue of Vogue is the one that says, "Oh, what kind of Kardashian are you? Take this 10-question quiz." We all want to take quizzes about, what's your spirit vegetable? We all
Right.
want to know this stuff. Is your boyfriend
Yeah.
cheating on you? Take these 10 questions and
Yeah.
quiz and find out. We all want to do that stuff. And in fact, in the summer, I'm working with a really spectacular woman whose name is Jean Opplinger. And Jean and I are launching a product into the market that takes this from being a sociological assessment tool, which is what it's built for now, is large groups of people, down to that psychological level where you'll answer a series of questions and we'll be able to, based on the data, not based on you answering the right question or not, but based on what close to 1 million other people have already told us, we'll come back and say, here's your values. And here's how you can use them. And here's how they can make your life better at work and at home and your relationships. And then leaders inside organizations will be able to take that information and see it at an aggregated level. Nobody gets to see everybody's individual stuff, but the CEO can see my marketing department's values are like this and my sales department's values are like this. And so I need to be understanding that as a leader to know how to drive this ship in the right direction. And furthermore, my customers' values are this and my shareholders' values are that. And they'll all overlap at some point. There's all these different values clusters will overlap. And where you find those 3 or 4 values that are the same for all the stakeholder groups in an organization, those become your North Star values. And now, as a leader, you're able to say, I'm making my decisions to go in that direction, and it's going to work for everybody, instead
Mm.
of making some decisions that work for some people and some that work for other people. If you know what everybody cares about inside their heart, not to belittle the important work that CEOs do, but it becomes a lot easier to know what direction to head if you know what people value.
Well, and I think that that's the thing that really sort of captures my imagination with the work that you do is that, with these types of insights, taking that idea of having the insights, having that knowledge, which is so key, but so often, I'll see associations receive really great information, and then they sort of there are a few people who are in the room or who read the report that have that information, and then other people maybe get it filtered down. But how is it incorporated? How do the insights go from being insights to having impact, right? And I think that the exciting thing that I'm seeing today is that there are ways, sort of like in the ways that you're talking about, and taking this information that a lot of associations have never had before, and being able to find how to be the most relevant and to resonate the most with their members, and to incorporate that using some of the great technology that we have available. I mean, it would be wildly, it'd just be wildly effective to go from, okay, we have some basic demographic information, maybe some psychographic information if we got fancy once upon a time. But then to be able to have, what is it that our members care about the most, our particular membership, to know that, and then to feed that into some of the tools we have, the strategies that we create for our marketing, for our strategic planning, and to incorporate that throughout, it would be, I mean, I just think it would be such a transformation for many organizations.
It really is, because what it does is well, as I said, it gives you that North Star that you can use as a guiding light as you make
Mhm.
decisions about everything, large and small. It reduces risk, because let's face it, you're going to have to make a decision about doing something one way or another. So let's
Yeah.
be really practical, and like, let's think small for a moment. So you're sitting around deciding who's the next speaker you're going to bring in for a fundraising event for the association. Well, this guy seems cool, and that person's interesting, and I saw this one talk and they were great, and uh, all right, well, let's go with that one. But if you know that the driving influencer, the drivers behind everything that your membership is looking for, has to do with financial security and employment security, well, then you're going to serve up a speaker that somehow is going to give them more of that. That's the way
Mhm.
you make the choice. You got to decide these things, even just who's the speaker, what kind of program are we going to put in place? How are we going to allocate our budget? What should our strategic priorities be for the next year? Somehow you're going to make a decision. Why not make that decision in a way that aligns with what people really care about, instead of whatever other tools that you're going to use to make that decision? I
Yeah.
would love to see someday where, imagine if politicians had to do this. Imagine if politicians, it's a big pipe dream, it's never going to happen, but imagine if politicians were given a list of the values in priority for their constituents when they decide that they're going to run. So here's the things that people that you're going to represent, this is what they actually care about. So base your platform on this. And then once you get elected, we're going to hold you accountable to only doing things that reflect the values of the people that you've been elected to represent. And if you err, if you move off and listen to some crazy ass lobby group, or you start doing things that have nothing to do with the values of your constituent, we get to fire your ass and get you out of here. Uh, Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
amazing if that
I
was the way
mean,
the world ran? Suddenly, like,
wow. You mean accountability? Are you talking about
yeah,
like, really?
kooky,
Ugh.
kooky, huh? Kooky.
Yeah, at first I'm like, people who know their constituents and are playing into their value, but you're talking about for good, and then being able to hold them accountable for it. Now, see that right there, my friend, that's innovative. Yes.
Well, now, if we can also take that whole, you know what? Let me tell you a little story. Um, Regardless of whether we're talking about politics or associations or retail or fundraising or anything, keep this story in mind. We all have had this experience where we're away. Usually it happens when we're away. We're on a trip, we're on a conference, we're somewhere, and you meet someone for the first time and you click. And
Mhm.
you're finishing each other's sentences and you decide you're going to have a drink and you have a drink. And you're just like, at some point, one of you says, I feel like I have known you my whole life. How is this possible? We've all had that experience, right? Well, what's happened is you found someone whose values are the same as yours. You can finish each other's sentences because you know how you're processing the world. Something happens and you're like, oh my gosh. And you say, exactly. You don't even have to, you both know because you have the same filtering mechanism for what's going on in the world around you. And if that person said to you, let's skip out of the rest of this thing, it's boring, let's go bungee jumping, they'd know how to say that in a way that you go, I've never wanted to
Yeah.
bungee jump, but yeah, let's do it. That sounds like the smartest idea. And then let's say the next morning, you meet them at the breakfast table, and they're a little. You can tell right away something's not right. Something's off. Let's say they had a bad phone call from home. Something not good happened, and they're feeling a little down. Well, because you see the world the same way they do, you'd know exactly what you needed to say and do to make them feel better, help them get through.
Mhm.
So that's called having a fast friend. You made a fast friend. You found someone whose view of the world is the same as yours. Now imagine if you could have fast friends at scale. If that's how well you knew the members of your association, if that's how well you knew the politicians that you're trying to influence with policy that you'd like to see them enact, if that's how well you knew your customers, your employees, so everybody, if you knew them like that, there isn't anything you couldn't do. Fast friends at scale needs to be the goal. And the only way to get there is to know what their values are and be able to have that kind of relationship with them.
Mm. Fast friends at scale. Fast friends at scale. Yeah, and I think that in when I think about associations and the struggles that we hear most often, when you work within the association industry, you'll hear about relevance, value proposition. How are we going to prove our value proposition to our membership and win over the hearts and minds, right? And this is supposed to be especially important for associations because we're all supposed to be driven around a common mission. So it should be, theoretically anyway, right? It should be somewhat easy to guess what people care about because we at least know that we care about this one mission that is at the heart of why this association exists. And yet, it
Hmm.
is still a situation where we're talking about this, and a lot of associations are saying, we need to think about it in a different way because what we're doing right now isn't working.
Yeah.
And so when I look at the value graphics and I think about, how your research is able to dial in on, what it is that matters the most to an organization's members to better understand a group of people. I just think it's wildly important work. And I'm also excited, as you know, we've talked about this before. I'm wildly excited by the fact that whenever you're able to quantify and put things like what you're talking about into things like generative AI and start to play around with how you can think about these things differently using your technology, that you could imbue the entire organization with these insights. It's just such an exciting time.
Data, I couldn't agree more. And one of the reasons we approach this mission of ours to build a values driven world in this particular way is because the love language of organizations is data. It's one thing to stand up in front of a room full of decision makers in a boardroom and say, I really think we should be doing this because I really think we should. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's another thing to say, the data says this is what we should be doing. So taking this messy, illogical, emotional, irrational thing called human behavior, and as it turns out, it's not all that messy. There are patterns in there. There is data that we can use to track that. Turning that into the love language of an organization, it gives people within that organization the political ability to make tough decisions that they otherwise
Mhm.
wouldn't make, risky decisions, because the data is there to support it. It isn't as much of a risk to go down that untrod path if you know that that's the direction people care about and they want you to go down that path. Otherwise, you get paralyzed. You're like, whoa, we have no idea if this is going to work or not. So we better just innovate by a millimeter. Let's just
Yeah.
innovate a little tiny bit because everything else seems too risky until the data comes along and goes, it's not risky. You're like, oh, okay, cool. Well, let's do that then. Let's go in that direction. So it brings innovation into the room. It gives you that political capital you need to make the cool, fun decisions that can go in really transformative, interesting ways. Do I dare tell you a story about an association? I'm going to do this and try and just not tell anybody who it is. Uh,
That's good. And actually, I saw that Rachel and Dahlia are both on, and two wonderful, wonderful people, smart, savvy, and very aware of what's happening with the events world and the association world. And I know that they're loving this. Thanks for watching, you guys.
yay. Um,
Yeah.
So very, very large international association asked us to come and talk to them. The problem they were having, been around a long, long time. The problem they were having is how do we get young people to join
Mm,
this association? It sounds like a common issue.
mm,
Uh, so we were like, okay, well, let's figure out the values of the people who are currently members and the values of the people who aren't members and see what's going on and why this group said yes, and this group is, even though they should say yes, haven't. So we came back, and one of the things we'd found out is that the current members had made it into a bit of a I don't mean this to sound sexist, but it will come across that way because I don't have a better term, but they'd made it into a bit of an old boys club. There
mhm.
were women as well, but it was like that whole mentality of we get to do all the fun, groovy, cool stuff because we've been here. And you got to pay your dues before you get to do any of the fun, cool stuff, including hanging out with us because we're the important people in the industry. And so they basically threw up all these walls and said to somebody who's new in the industry to go and say, well, the reason I would join is because you're there and I don't get to talk to you and I don't get to be in the room with you and I don't get to do stuff with you and I don't get to be on that committee and I don't get to volunteer my time this way. And like, no, the answer is no. And so walking into a room full of the people who are already there who had set this up as their own little club uh, and saying, you're the problem,
Yeah.
it's sometimes a tough sell. But you find those people inside the organization who get it. And now that they have the data, they're able to stand up and go, listen, we have a systemic problem here. And the systemic problem is we've set up our organization in a way that makes it not seem like a really great idea for somebody new to come and join. So how can we start to mix this up? How can we start to do things where they get the things that they value while we get to maintain the things that we value? Where did these things overlap? I'll give you one more story because I'm on a roll. This is about a private club. It makes me sound like 1% and a little snooty, but I belong to the Vancouver club up here.
Mhm.
And they asked me to come in at one point and help them understand what's going on with new membership, old membership, all this kind of stuff. And so there was a workshop at the end of a process here, and was watching people file in. And a lot of the people who belong to this club are retired CEOs of like forestry companies and trucking companies and all the sort of resource-based industries, timber companies that have made British Columbia successful and thrive over a very long period of time. And so these guys are coming in, and they're in their, khakis and a golf shirt, and they sit down, and then in comes the one black guy in the room who's got dreadlocks, and he's in a three-piece suit and a tie. He's got cufflinks, he's looking sharp. And he comes and he sits down, and his name is Prevail. He's a rapper. And so we got retired forestry CEOs and a rapper. I'm like, wow, this is going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We started to have conversations about what should change and what should stay the same. The loudest voice in the room for things staying the same: no cell phones being used in the club. Nobody's allowed to take photos in the club. The dress code needs to remain formal. All the tradition of the club needs to remain intact. The loudest voice in the room was Prevail.
Mm-hmm.
The rapper wanted all the tradition to stay in place. It was the retired CEOs who were like, kids these days, they wear jeans. Let them wear jeans to the club. Who cares if the cell phones are out every now and then? As long as it's not getting out of hand. Exactly the opposite of what you would have thought.
Yeah.
Case in point, demographics are nonsense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I think that that also speaks to why people want to belong to that club, and why it's been there for so long, and the reason that somebody, I think that a lot of times we get caught up in the appearances of things like, maybe we should loosen up. I can see maybe we should let people wear jeans and whatever. Or maybe it's something else, right? Maybe based on the values of the people who are interested in belonging, who want to be a part of it, maybe it's something else that you need to be looking at as a way to bring those people in and make them feel like they belong.
And what we ended up with there is the notion that the value of personal growth was a uniting influence. The reason people belong to this club, one of the reasons, like everybody's got their own reasons, but the one everybody united around was the notion that this place makes me a better version of myself. That I'm able to achieve more. I'm able to health and fitness facilities. I'm able to maintain that aspect of my life. I'm able to entertain my clients. I'm able to do all travel better. There's all kinds of travel reciprocal. This is about me being a better version of myself. And that cuts across all demographics. It cuts across everybody in the entire organization, including the staff, by the way. So it was a wonderful sort of unifying moment to identify that one thing that everybody could rally around, and then move on and start to come up with better ways to help people with personal growth that worked across all demographics.
Well, I wish that your message could go out far and wide to every association executive I know in the world. And I'm looking at everyone I know, and I'm telling them, if you're watching this, if you're hearing my words later, I just want you to know, like, this is important work. And David, I know that you've been on to talk with me before. I will be inviting you to talk with me again. But thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for telling these stories, and for having the courage to pursue this line of questioning that has allowed you to arrive at information and data that will make a difference for people.
Thank you. That's a very beautiful thing to say. And it really does tap into the reason we're doing all of this. The whole team here is very motivated to try and make the world a better place. And it's what our way of doing that is to try and change the way we all think about ourselves, get in touch with our own values. Because if we change the way we think about ourselves, you can't help but change the way you think about other people. And if we change the way we think about people, we can change the world, and we can make it a less divisive, more fair, better place, hopefully for us. And if not for us, then for the generations that come next.
Well said, my friend. Well said. Well, thank you for joining us today. I think this is a good, I have all kinds of questions for you, but you know what? I think that this is a good, let's process what we just heard.
Okay.
And I want to share your information, how people can contact you. Now, I do have a couple of things if people are watching right now. David Allison is an amazing speaker. I have heard him. He is absolutely, as you can imagine, he tells great stories. But what you do that I love, David, is that you are able to really make an impact on stage in a way that when you're speaking to a group, you're truly speaking to that group. And so you're able to incorporate elements about what you know about them and that particular audience. And so awesome speaker, talk to him there. Valuegraphics.com is where you can go and you can find out more about the research and getting the research done for your organizations. You can also read the book. Now he has 2 books. This is the most recent one. Is this kind of weird to like sit here as I go through and sort of
No, it's like, this is
tell
great.
everybody, am I doing a good job?
I don't have to do it. I can just like
Do this. No, but get the book. I actually like physical books. So like, even if I'm listening to the audio, I like to take notes and stuff like that. So I'm the best kind of consumer for this stuff. But go pick up The Death of Demographics. You too can do the vanity filling out the test.
What kind of
yourself.
Kardashian are you test?
What kind of Kardashian are you kind of moment? You too can do that. And then obviously, if you want to reach out to David Allison, David's on all of the socials. You're really great. I love your posts on LinkedIn. But you're also active on Twitter. And so where do you point people to?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn's home base.
LinkedIn.
Everything
I
else
think
is kind of
LinkedIn
like,
is really,
you kind
yeah.
of got to do it or you're in trouble, right? So yeah, LinkedIn's where my heart is for sure.
Yes. And oh, Rachel has this comment. David needs to do an associations roadshow. Agreed. I 100% agree. So
I don't know what that is, but it has the word roadshow in it. So it sounds great.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So thank you, my friend. Is there anything I left out on how people can reach you that you would add to what I said?
Oh gosh, no, other than on both of those websites and on LinkedIn, my mission is to give away as much information as we can. We just try and help because we all need to pay our mortgages and we want to make some money and all that kind of stuff. But really, as I've said a few times now, we're doing this because we gotta. And so the more people I can help and give stuff to, the better. So please do join on LinkedIn. Please do come and say hi, follow along, help amplify the message. Let's get into conversations and let's talk about values. They're gonna save us.
Very well. All right. Can you believe it? I can't believe it. I just kind of kicked David off, but he knows he can see me. He can see me where we are right now. What an amazing individual. What amazing insights. And so if you want to find out more information, go to those websites I shared. Check out the show notes if you're listening to this later so that you can find the links on how to connect with him. If you didn't capture them and we're watching them just now. And until next time, association adventurers, association explorers, keep asking questions to learn every day. Because as Joseph Campbell once said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Have a great rest of the week, everyone.